Hecksher Ohlin model, also known as the factor endowment theory. L. Philip Hecksher wrote an important paper, The Effect of Foreign Trade on the Distribution of Income, in 1919, and it was published only in 1949. His student Bertrand Ohlin worked on interregional and international trade, and he combined the ideas of his teacher Heckscher and his together to construct what came to be known as the Heckscher Ohlin model. Bertrand Ohlin went on later to get his Nobel Prize in 1977 for his contribution to the theory of international trade and international capital movements, along with James Meade. Bertrand Ohlin considered international trade an extension of interlocal or interregional trade because the basis of trade was comparative cost differences. Now, what are the assumptions of the theorem? First and foremost, the trade between two countries is unrestricted. There are no restrictions placed on the movement of trade. Second, there are no transport costs, and the factor costs only affect the product prices. Factors of production are mobile within the country but not mobile between countries. Perfect competition prevails both in the product and factor markets. All production functions are homogeneous of the first degree, which means firms are experiencing constant returns to scale. This is to avoid increasing returns or decreasing returns, which in turn will affect the prices of goods. The other is that it is a 2 into 2 into 2 trade model, where it has got two commodities, two countries, and two factors of production, which here we have labor and capital, where Ricardo had only one factor of production. The other important idea here is that the two products that are being traded has got different factor intensities. That means commodity A is capital intensive and commodity B is labor intensive. The other idea is that this commodity A will be produced using the same intensity in both country A and B, and the labor intensive good will be produced using the same production technique in country A and B, though in different proportions. This Heckscher Ohlin model can be explained based on two main ideas. The one idea is that countries are endowed differently for their commodities, for the factors, and the other is that the factor intensities of the production of both the goods are different. Now, how do we say that Heckscher Ohlin model is an improvement over the Ricardian model? First of all, this model does not reject the Ricardian model. In fact, it makes this model more powerful because it is used as the basis of the Heckscher Ohlin model. The Ricardian theory had not explained the causes of the differences in the cost of production between the two countries. Therefore, this theory is considered to be more powerful in that sense that it has examined why the two countries produce the two goods at different costs. It introduces the relative commodity price differences because it introduced factor endowment. And because of the factor endowment, each country will experience differences in the price of the factors that are used in production. The Heckscher Ohlin model itself can be explained using two criteria. The first criterion is a relative factor abundance in terms of prices, and the other way of explaining the Heckscher Ohlin model is using factor abundance in terms of physical units. Let's first look at the Heckscher Ohlin model using the price criterion. The richness of the country is explained in terms of the factor endowment, and this is explained in terms of its reflection in factor prices. The amount of capital per worker is what is important, not the total quantity of a worker available in this particular criterion. And we say that the country A will be relatively capital abundant if the prices of the capital in country A divided by the price of labor in country A is lesser than the price of capital in country B divided by the price of labor in country B. So within the country also capital is cheaper, and between the countries also country A is cheaper in capital than that of country B. The same argument can be put for country B, where the country's labor in terms of country B is cheaper than the labor cost in country A. So if country A is abundant in capital, then the rate of interest should be lower in country A. And if country B is abundant in labor, then the labor or the wage rates will be lower in country B. So this is understood because of the supply. Then the next argument is that if a country is rich in a particular factor, then that country will specialize in the production of a good that uses the abundant factor and export that good, and import those goods in which it has got a scarcity of a particular factor. So we now have to prove that country A, we are assuming country A to be capital rich. So we now have to prove that country A will follow capital intensive method of production and country B will follow labor intensive method of production. Let's look at this particular diagram. We have the price line POPO, the budget line is GH. So at budget line GH, the country can produce 1 unit of commodity A by using OG of capital or OH of labor. Now let's more importantly focus on the POPO, which is the price factor price line, where labor capital can be exchanged for labor. We have used isoquants here, isoquant AA and isoquant BB. Isoquants are a member of the family of indifference curves. It shows the combination of labor and capital that are combined to produce 1 unit of output shown in the isoquant. So here what we are seeing is the isoquant, red isoquant is tangent to the price line at point E, which indicates that it requires OK unit of capital and OL unit of labor to produce the quantity of commodity E. Now this means that this country is already rich in capital and it is using more capital in the production of commodity A. Now let's look at the commodity B in the same country A. In this blue isoquant, what we find that it is tangent to the isoquant at point F. At point F, the isoquant shows that we need OK1 unit of capital and OL1 unit of labor. This clearly indicates that this manufacture of cloth requires more labor in country A. We also know that country A is not rich in labor. Therefore, it is using a scarce factor labor or L1 of labor and using less units of capital, which is OK1 unit of capital. The next task is now to find out what is the cost of producing 1 unit of commodity A and commodity B in country B. The only information we have about country B is that country B is abundant with labor. So now I have introduced two new lines here, new two price lines, the green price line P1, P1 and the purple price line P2, P2. If we want to produce 1 unit of commodity A in country B, measured on the budget line, we can have OC of capital or OD of labor alone. Now let's work with the price line. P1 price line is for the production of the capital good steel. P2 is the price line for the production of the labor intensive good cloth. Looking at the diagram, we can now understand that in country B to produce, so now we can see that the two price lines have been introduced. Let me go to the next one. Yeah. Now, we want to prove that country B is a labor intensive country and labor abundant country and capital deficient country. So the point of tangency for country B is different from the point of tangency for country A, because we also have a new price line for that. The price line P1 is tangent to the same isoquant but at a different point. It is tangent at point F1. So at F1, what is the quantity of capital it requires? What is the quantity of labor it requires? So to produce 1 unit of steel in country B, the country requires OB unit of capital or OB1 unit of labor. But we are aware that this country is rich in labor and scarce with capital. So this is how it will be able to manufacture the capital good using OB of capital and OL of labor. Coming to the next one, which is the production of cloth in country B, we find that the isoquant BB is tangent to the purple isoquant at point F1. At F1, we find that the country requires OS unit of labor and OS unit of capital and OS1 unit of labor. Now we know that this country is abundant with labor. This second position explains to us that the country is able to use more of the abundant factor and less of the scarce factor. This obviously leads us to the conclusion that it is better for this country to produce the labor intensive good because it has got more labor and it can produce with more labor and with less capital. So by using this diagram and two isoquants, two price lines and the older price line for country A, we have been able to prove that country A will specialize in the production of commodity on the vertical axis, that is a capital intensive good, and the country B will specialize in the production of a labor intensive good using the abundant factor. Now, let's explain the Hecksher model, Hecksher model with the physical terms. Now, physical terms means a country is relatively capital abundant if it is endowed with higher proportion of capital. So, and also the quantity of the factors that are available is fixed. We shall now use the production possibility curve or the production possibility frontier. We can see there are two production possibility curves. PQ is the production possibility curve for country A and P1Q1 is the production possibility curve for country 2 or country B. So if both the countries can choose to produce anywhere on the production possibility curve. Now let us assume that both the countries decide to produce both the commodities, in which case country A will produce at point C because there's a point of tangency with the price line. So at point C it will produce and country B will produce at point D. So both the countries, if they choose to produce both the commodities, they will produce along the line OR. But the slopes of the two production possibility curves indicate something else. The slopes of the two production possibility curve indicates that country 1 seems to have more capital abundance and country B has got more labor. And the curves, the slope of the PPC of country A is steeper than the slope of the PPC of country B. So thus we can say that country A would rather choose to produce on its vertical axis, that is, produce more of capital intensive good, and country B will produce something more of the labor intensive good because its production possibility curve is much flatter, indicating that it has got more labor. So this is how the Hecksher Ohlin model can be explained using prices and also in terms of physical quantities. Now let us see what is it that we can critically evaluate this theory for. Every theory needs an evaluation, and there are so many evaluations that will be available in different books. The reason these evaluations are important is because of these evaluations, new theories emerge, new ideas emerge. So these are some of the critical ideas that have come. It is definitely considered to be better than the Ricardian model because it is more scientific. It is actually presented in terms of a mathematical model also. But the thing is, it has not been able to develop the general equilibrium idea which it started off with because it has ignored the demand, the factors that can change in the demand. It has ignored technological changes. It has also neglected yeah. So these factors show that it has neglected the general equilibrium idea that it started off with. It also ignores the technological change that can take place in the course of production process. That therefore it doesn't complete the theory that way. It says that it doesn't ignore into it does it ignores the qualitative differences of the factors of production. It has failed to look into how to measure these factors of production. So these are some of the criticisms that are available. Nevertheless, this Heckscher model is considered to be superior to the Ricardian model because it is able to examine more ideas about this trade. Now, what happened with this once this theory was presented, sometimes these theories get into a paradoxical situation. Now, this was to be empirically tested by more economists, especially Wesley Leontief. He went on to empirically test this particular theory in the case of USA and collected the data of trade for USA for several years and used an input-output analysis to examine whether this theory can explain the theory of USA's trade patterns. But to his surprise, he found that the USA economy actually exports labor-intensive good instead of capital-intensive good, and imports capital-intensive good instead of labor-intensive good. So it needed an explanation, and the explanation that was given probably and accepted was that it has got surplus of labor, so it had to use that labor and produce goods that would sell off the labor outside, and it was saving on the capital because it wanted to become a capital intensive country. So also the other reason is that labor might have been highly productive, so the country might have used labor more. This theory has been tested by other countries also, and some countries have proved it while others have not. Therefore, this particular theory has remained, this Leontief paradox has remained as a paradox and has not been able to explain clearly why these kind of situations emerge in countries. Now, when we have critically evaluated the theory, we also find that these critical ideas leads to the emergence of new kinds of theories taking into consideration newer variables which were ignored in the earlier theory. So here these are the noteworthy extensions of the Hecksher Ohlin model, the Hecksher Ohlin Venneck model, then the Stopler Samuelson model, which used wages as its variable, the Rybinski's theory, which uses the expansion of output as a variable, and the famous factor price equalization theorem, which establishes the relationship between the variables. Now, this was how we can understand this major theory in international trade. The entire edifice of international trade is based on the theory of comparative cost and the theory of Hecksher Ohlin. The rest are all additions and extensions of this particular theory. So it is important to learn these two theories very well. I hope you have found this video useful, and you will share it with your friends. Click the like button and also subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed. I have used Bo Sodastin's international trade as the basis for this explanation. Thank you.